owner of Butterfield Realty. You might have heard my name before. I appreciate everybody coming out today. I would like to thank the Cold Spring Fire Company, President John Landolfi and Assistant Steve Smith for coming to our rescue and allowing us to use the facility today for this meeting. You are all very fortunate to have such dedicated volunteers in your community. It is our goal today to answer many questions about Butterfield. And in addition, what we want to do is we want to start off with an introduction on how the project began, how it's progressed, and where we are today. I would like to introduce the team. Matt Moran is with Unicorn Contracting, Ann Cudinola and Tim Miller Associates, planners, and Steve Barshoff, who is the attorney. Steve is also going to be acting as a moderator today. And Steve, I'm going to give it to you. Take it from there.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Love to have seen more of you planning board meetings, but I'm happy that you're here today. Let me tell you what this is not, and let me tell you what this is. This is not a public hearing. We're not here to debate pro or con. So if people are going to make statements that are in favor of the project, well, I'd love to hear them. I'm going to cut you off. Okay? If you're going to make statements against the project, well, I'd love to hear those too, because you learn from the opposition. I'm going to cut you off. What this is about is questions. Any question that you have of any kind that relates to this project, please ask your questions. The reason for this, and the reason for this now, is that a lot of folks were not at the planning board meetings. And the village board and the planning board are going to be meeting next week, and this project is going to go into another phase of review. And so we want to make sure that the community is informed, but I don't know what your questions are. I don't know what information you're lacking. So we wanted to have this meeting, and the timing was picked for no other reason other than the village board and the planning board are meeting next week. So we decided, hey, it would be a good idea to get questions answered before that occurs. So here we are, and we're so glad that you turned out. What I'd like you to do now is make believe that you're in the movie theater and make believe I'm giving that one of those pithy announcements. Please turn off your cell phones, turn them down, put them on vibrate, whatever, so we don't get interrupted. You've been given cards. I think that as you came in, if you haven't gotten them and you need others, we'll give them to you. There are index cards. I'd appreciate it if you'd write your question down on the index cards. We're going to let you, I'll recognize people from the audience, to have you ask your questions, but we would like you to turn them in at the end so we can post them on the website. We can post answers to questions that we may not have for you today. So if we say to you, wise people know what they do not know. If there's an I don't know or I'll find out to your question, it will be answered and it'll be posted on the Butterfield website. Now, those of you some of you may not know that there is a Butterfield website. What is the way to get on it? Can you?
It's on the flyer.
It's on the flyer. Okay. So on your flyer, you'll be able to, you know where that is, you'll be able to log on. All right, any other preliminaries? I think that's it. All right, so Tim is going to give you a summary, a history of how we got to where we are today.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to take probably about 12 or 14 minutes to talk about the background of this project and what it is now. And I want to take some time just to talk about the chronology, because I think it bears understanding how we got to where we are right now. The Butterfield Hospital site is 5.7 acres. It's located along Route 9D and Paulding Avenue. Right now, the Butterfield site contains the Leahy Pavilion, which is about an 11,500 square foot medical office building, and it contains the remnants in the village, allows for hospitals, nursing homes, health-related facilities, a medical center, a school, and presumably a university, a public library, municipal buildings, and senior citizen housing. Those uses are allowed on this property right now without any zoning change, without any decision-making by the Board of Trustees. If someone made an application for something that contain those uses, they go directly to the planning board for site plan approval. Under the existing B4 zoning, you can build a building 2.5 stories high, 35 feet high, and you're allowed to develop building coverage of the site that would consume about 25% of the property. So given the size of the property at 5.7 acres, under the existing zoning, you could develop a project that would contain somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 to 175,000 square feet of non-residential use, medical buildings, schools, nursing facilities, municipal buildings, etc., or a mix that would include senior citizen housing and those uses. Now, Paul purchased this property about 7 or 8 years ago, and plans for a mixed-use development and a zoning change began evolving when the village mayor, the town supervisor, town of Phillipstown, county executive, and some county legislators came to him. There were numerous meetings, and they asked Paul to consider accommodating some of the needs of the community, the town, the village, and the county in the redevelopment of Butterfield. Excuse me. In 2010, the village board actually held a vote, and they recommended using a portion of the site for municipal uses that would include the post office, the village police department, a justice court, a senior citizen center, and a firehouse, an ancillary firehouse. In May of 2011, the village board affirmed its position. They actually sent a letter of intent to Paul expressing its desire to lease 2,000 square feet of unfinished space at the site. Now, a mixed-use project as suggested by these various parties cannot occur under the existing B4 zoning. It would not be permitted. Paul agreed to accommodate these requests, and hence the process for changing the zoning of the property began actually in earnest in January of 2012, about 2 years ago. At that time, his team came up with a zoning concept called the Planned Unit Development, a PUD. And that application was filed with the village. It was prepared in consultation with the then village attorney, and it had a concept plan that showed these various uses, as I mentioned. The village board generally endorsed the concept for the site. It hired Green Plan, a planning consultant, in February of 2012 to provide technical input and advice on how to move the project forward. Multiple meetings then took place with the planning board. There were a lot of discussions about the zoning approach, the project design, what worked, what didn't work. In March, however, the planning board decided to stop its review of the project and convene a public meeting to get community input on this project. They felt that the site, was an important piece of property in the village, and they wanted to hear what you folks had to say about the project. There was a community design charrette that was held on April 14th of 2012. That charrette was kind of moderated by a design consultant that the village retained named Ray Curran. As a result of that workshop, there were a number of recommendations that were made. There was a report filed with the village. Those recommendations included preserve a portion of the Butterfield lawn as an open space gateway to the village, provide public space for local uses such as a community center, establish a traditional pedestrian-oriented streetscape and layout with the possibility of zero lot line setbacks that would hide parking, preserve village scale and character, permit mixed uses, reflect village architecture, plan the Grove, which is the piece of property adjacent to the Butterfield site, create a tax positive development, facilitate pedestrian access to the Food Town shopping area, and prevent a gated neighborhood and cul-de-sacs. The village's design consultant, Ray Curran, retained by the village, subsequently produced 2 concept plans. One was the conceptual mixed development plan, which is basically this drawing. This is Ray's drawing. And the second one was a plan based on what could be built under the existing B4 zoning, which is this drawing. So these were produced by Ray Curran. This basically would support allowable uses under B4. This could be built without any zoning change or zoning decision from the Village Board of Trustees. So the recommendations that came out of that charrette, actually this drawing, were incorporated into the project design with the exception of the Grove property, which was excluded at the request of the Village Board. So now we're early in 2012. In May of 2012, the Village Board decided to abandon the PUD zoning concept. Rather than create a new zoning district, the thought was it may be more efficient to simply amend the B4 zone and require conformity of the concept plan that flowed out of the community charrette with this amended B4 zone. The Village Board also recommended that changes be made to the concept plan as follows. They wanted Paul to add single-family development along Paulding Avenue and zone that to R1. And that's been done. That's now part of the current concept plan. They wanted all the senior housing to be market rate housing. That's been done. They wanted the uses to be tax positive with retail, office, and senior housing. That's been accomplished. They wanted the majority of the existing Butterfield lawn, about 70%, to be set aside as open space that would continue to function as a gateway to the village and provide space for community recreational uses. That's been done. They wanted the project to include building area that would be suitable for public space for local use, such as a community center. That is possible. They wanted the project to have traditional pedestrian-oriented streetscape and layout. That has been accomplished. They wanted the buildings to be designed with the intention of preserving the village scale and character and to reflect existing village architecture. Now, the buildings have not been finally designed yet, but they will be subject to architectural review by village boards. So that will be accomplished. They wanted the project to provide the possibility for municipal office space and spaces for the post office, Putnam County, and or a municipally sponsored community center, and that is a high likelihood. And I just want to say that these buildings are going to provide space that will be leased to somebody. Paul's intention is to offer those lease opportunities to municipal facilities. No leases have been signed right now. It's all open. Now, in order to implement this plan, the old hospital building needs to be demolished. So during the balance of 2012, Paul basically continued to refine his project plans and appeared in front of the Cold Spring Historic District Review Board, the HDRB, to secure a certificate of appropriateness, which would allow for the demolition of the Butterfield Hospital building. Now, in November of 2012, the Village Board held a public hearing on the then current version of the revised B4 zoning. There was strong public support at that time for the redevelopment of the site. And by the way, this chronology is contained in the PCNR, so you can affirm everything I'm saying by going back into the records of the PCNR and reading the news articles. However, no decision had been made at that point on the demolition of the old hospital building. Now, in December of 2012, it became increasingly clear that any zoning change that took place for the Butterfield site should be specifically tied to the concept plan that flowed out of the community charrette. The village wanted a commitment to the plan with a degree of certainty of what was agreed upon in the community charrette would actually be built. The current B4A zoning, which is what is now in front of the Board of Trustees, was drafted shortly after December of 2012, and in it, the concept plan was actually tethered to the zoning. In other words, the zoning only becomes valid if this project is built the way the concept plan showed it to be proposed. Soon after this, the HDRB members approved a certificate of appropriateness for the hospital demolition, which basically allowed the project to move forward. So another public hearing was held in January of 2013 on the proposed B4A zoning. Now, the B4A zoning was drafted by the village's attorney. Public comments on the zoning at that time were mixed, and for a number of months, no progress was made. In June of last year, 2013, the village board unanimously agreed that the village's drafted law and the village's concept plan were acceptable, and they referred it to the planning board to carry out the environmental review. Now, prior to this time, the applicant had submitted multiple versions of an environmental assessment form. That thick document on the table there is basically what has evolved out of the environmental review. In August of 2013, the planning board declared intent to be lead agency pursuant to SEQR, that's the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. And during the next 5 months, the planning board hired its own attorney, its own engineering and planning consultant, and worked with the applicant or team to basically modify this environmental study and answer a lot of questions that came up through a number of planning board meetings. This EAF is publicly available. It includes hundreds of pages of documents, drawings, documentation relating to the project. It has traffic studies. It has fiscal impact analysis. It provides information on how taxes were calculated. This has all been reviewed by the town's planning consultant. The tax assessment was reviewed by the town assessor. And it's posted on the internet, and you can go to the village's website. There's a link there that links it to my website. You can review everything that's in there. It's fascinating reading. So after 5 months of review by the planning board and its consultants, last month the planning board reached a conclusion that the project would have no significant environmental impacts. And this allows for the project to now go back to the Board of Trustees for a public hearing and a decision on the zoning amendment. So the meeting next week is going to be a joint meeting of the Planning Board and the Village Board. The Planning Board also prepared a report that endorsed the zoning change with a number of recommendations on for the Village Board's consideration on tweaks to the proposed zoning. And a number of requests on the Planning Board's future involvement with the site plan. That's the background. That's how we got to today, practically speaking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project, and then we'd love to hear your questions. So the B4 district, as it's presently drafted, as it's presently codified in the village's code, would remain unchanged. A new district would be incorporated into the village's code called B4A, Medical and Healthcare Facility Mixed Use District. It would permit senior citizen housing, municipal and other government uses, retail stores, businesses and professional offices, banks, and mixed uses consisting of 2 or more permitted uses. In addition to that zone amendment, the portion of the site which fronts along Paulding Avenue would be rezoned to R1 to allow 3 single-family homes. This local law was drafted by the village attorney. It's also available on the village's website. So as shown on the concept plan in the charrette, the project would include, I'm going to get this other drawing. This is a little harder to read because it's kind of an intricate drawing. I'm going to put it right here. Building 1 would be, this is building 1 here, which is this building, would be a 15,000 square foot retail office building. Building 2 would be a 17,500 square foot office retail building. There would be 55 market rate senior condominium units in buildings 3, 4, 5, and 6. There's a community center for Butterfield residents. This is not a public community center, but for the zoning requires a certain amount of community space be provided for the senior citizens that would connect buildings 4, 5, and 6. Basically, you can see that this plan almost follows the concept plan that came out of the charrette 100%. The project also includes retaining the Leahy Pavilion, which is 11,500 square feet. There would be about 31 units of senior housing in buildings 4, 5, and 6, and there would be parking beneath the building. And 25 units in building 3. The senior buildings would contain a mix of efficiencies and 1 and 2 bedroom units. The units would be marketed as for sale condominiums. They're projected to sell somewhere between $299,000 and $375,000, depending upon market conditions. They may be rented by the applicant until such time as they are sold. The ownership of the units will be deed restricted. One owner occupant must be 55 years of age or older. No permanent residents under the age of 18 will be permitted. Guests under the age of 18 would be permitted for a maximum stay of 3 months. Occupancy by rental tenants would be bound by the same restriction, and the monitoring of those restrictions would be the responsibility of the homeowners association. And those restrictions are subject actually to the zoning code requirements. If anyone attempts to reside in this senior project that doesn't meet the criteria, they would actually be in violation of the zoning, which would be subject to enforcement by the village. Approximately 221 parking spaces will be located on site, a combination of indoor and outdoor parking. The community charrette recommended parking along Route 9D, but basically with the underground, with the below building parking, we have enough parking to meet the requirements of the zoning. There will be three site accesses. There'll be 3 site accesses along 9D, pretty much in the same place where they exist today. And the site access from Paulding will be eliminated, and there'll just be the three driveways to the 3 single-family lots. There's existing sidewalks along Route 9D and Paulding Avenue, which would remain or be relocated if necessary as part of the village's sidewalk system. The applicant would preserve about 1 acre of the open lawn area designated as Gateway Park. This is an area that has historically been used by the public for sledding, farmers market, carnivals, pickup games, dog walking, etc. The applicant has volunteered to allow public use of the Gateway Park area and is committed to working out the details of how that would occur with the village during site plan review. During site plan review, which is the step that will occur when once the Board of Trustees takes action on the B4A, there'll be landscape and lighting plans developed. There'll be significant landscape treatments of the site, the foundations of the buildings. There'll be preservation of the large copper beech tree on the property. There'll be more detailed architectural drawings of the proposed buildings. The EAF also has some renderings of the buildings as they're presently envisioned. This is an artist's rendering of how the buildings would look on the approach on Route 9D northbound as you come into the village. And all of this, of course, will be subject to review by the village's Architectural Review Board. As I stated previously, the Planning Board determined that there will not be significant adverse impacts expected as a result of the redevelopment. The project now goes back to the Village Board for action on the B4A zoning. The Planning Board did prepare their report and their recommendation regarding the zone amendment, along with a number of additional recommendations. There is a meeting of the Village Board and the Planning Board this Tuesday night to discuss adoption of the zoning. So the applicant is basically looking forward to working with the Village Board and the Planning Board in making this project a reality after a pretty long process. And that concludes my presentation, and if you have questions, we'd love to hear them.
Okay. Right, let me just add 1 or 2 items, because Tim went through a couple of things quickly, and I want to be sure that everybody understands clearly. I want to focus for just a minute or 2 about the environmental review, because not everybody fully understands how this works. And I got a couple of questions from a news reporter after one of the meetings that revealed to me that there wasn't complete understanding of how this process occurred, and maybe some of you are confused as well. The Village Board made an affirmative decision that the environmental review of this project should be undertaken by the planning board. So that was a Village Board decision that had nothing to do with the applicant one way or the other. What we did was we provided the planning board with what is called an environmental assessment form, which has a variety of detailed information in it. And then the planning board retained its own consultants, and they came back and asked for more information. information, and that they asked for more information. And then they asked for more information, and this is the product of all of the information that they requested. And as Tim said, it's available online. Should you have a desire for a cure for insomnia, I promise you this is it. Okay? Now, the planning board did not just simply gather this information. It evaluated the information. It's required under the law to evaluate the information. What is it that the planning board is required to do? They had to determine if there was a single potential significant adverse environmental impact. If they found one potential significant adverse environmental impact, they would be required under the law to have a full environmental impact statement. They did not reach that conclusion. They concluded, after all of the analyses and the documents that were presented, that there were no potential significant adverse environmental impacts, and so they issued what is called a negative declaration. And that ends the environmental review process. That's the part I want you to really lock onto today, that there is no further environmental review process. It is now over. So what the village board is going to do is, based upon its determinations about the wisdom of the local law and what should be in it and so forth, they're going to proceed to consider that with the environmental review having ended. And if you're curious to read the negative declaration, I believe it's posted on the planning board's website. It's not a very long document. You can read the conclusions that they reach. Now, the last thing I want to quickly describe for you are the recommendations. The planning board had two functions. The first function was the environmental review I described. The second function is, under your village's zoning law, the planning board is required to review and advise to the village board the contents of proposed local laws, and so they did. Now, the text has not been completely finalized. It's literally going through the scrivener's work to put down on paper what was decided at the last planning board meeting, but there is a recommendation, an affirmative recommendation, that the village board adopt a B4A zoning amendment. So I want you to also lock in on that. They made that affirmative statement. They also included in their materials that the village board consider better articulating the priorities that are there behind this law. I'm going to give you some examples. The site has a large building 4, 5, and 6, where the senior housing is. It's a big building because there's underground parking. If you want to make that building smaller, you want to break it up and so forth, there may be impacts on the amount of open space that will be available. So there are questions that the village board needs to ask and answer about what are the most important priorities. You have a very large gateway park of over 1 acre in size leading into this. Is that more important than the size of the building? These are some of the things that the village board has to weigh in on, and of course they're going to want to hear from all of you. There will be an opportunity, and there must be as a matter of law, for there to be a public hearing, where you are going to have the opportunity to say whatever it is that you want about the project, the proposed zoning, and so forth. And that's the reason why we're not soliciting the comments today, by the way. You'll have your opportunity to give to the village board. Today we want to answer your questions. I want you to be clear about the process. So the recommendations that come from the planning board were a series of concerns about the size of buildings, the planning board's flexibility to be able to modify the plan during site plan review, and there were similar questions raised that the planning board said to the village board, please go back and look at this, and that's going to be the types of things that the village board will have to consider. So I hope that brings you fully up to speed as to where we are today, and now I'll be happy to recognize people with questions. Don't be bashful. Yes, sir.
The heat, what type of heat?
Say it again, just a little bit
The
louder.
heat. What type, and the hot water?
Heat and hot water.
What type of?
Natural gas.
I mean,
Speak it loud, don't to me.
right now, it's early to say, but the gas line has been looked into. It's not something that looks like it's going to be brought down into the village, so it's probably going to be propane or fuel oil or something of that nature.
right now, the propane, I mean, the price of, gas is the most effective, so it's not gonna do it.
Is there gas service in the site
It's
now?
just too far away, it's not practical.
Oh, so it's not practical, it'll have to be an alternative fuel source. Next question, yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a senior, I live in Garrison. I was interested in this to eventually sell my house, get senior living. At this time, there's only 2 locations available. Chestnut would serve a great purpose, but it's income related. And then you have Westbury Court, which is 400,000. So there's no middle. So I guess what they did in Glassbury is work with the town. I think they took about 12 units at an affordable price to people of residents of Villagetown. I think it's one of the fire department people she brought over, something like that, at a much lower price. Okay. Now, I'm a little shocked at what the gentleman just said, $299 and $375, because I emailed a couple of weeks ago, and I got an answer from Diane Ferris, okay, and she was very pleasant, and there were 1 to 2 bedroom units ranging in a 900 to 1,200 square feet. Pricing would start in the mid to upper 200s. Now, if real estate's going up that quickly, let me know. Put the house on the
So
market.
your question-
Now I'm saying you're talking efficiencies from $299 to $375.
What your question is?
My question is, what happened?
Projected prices.
What happened in 2 weeks? Where'd the 100,000 go?
Yeah, I think what happened is that in the EAF process,
Right.
the planners put down a number that was I don't know what it was, 295 to 385.
Okay.
And, you know, we don't really know how that number came about, but a more practical number would be mid-200s to upper 200s. That would be a more practical range.
Okay. I know there's just one more question.
Yeah.
Just for experience, Trump Park, they built that, it started about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, they built it in Yorktown. We got invited to the wife and I to the first meeting they were going to show, and they had to build it. Okay. He started as 1 bedroom units as 500,000. Okay. We can't afford that. Make a long story short, now they're 250,000. So I would just say rethink your pricing. Okay, because you know, at $299 for efficiency, you're not going to sell it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Just stand up if you would mind, so we can hear you. And by the way, if you have your questions written down, I will collect them at the end.
You know, you mentioned the average price, you know, somewhere in that, say 300, 250.
Well, you said $299.
Okay, 299.
Efficiency for $299.
But when you figured out whether or not this is going to be a net tax revenue positive for the town, it said that you based it on an average home value of $500,000. So if you look at the tax base, you did your calculations, it says that it's going to be a net positive tax.
We get Dan to comment on the tax analysis that was done. I don't know that the 500 is correct, so let her speak to that, please.
I prepared the fiscal analysis, it's based on a value of approximately $325 for the townhouse units. It results in a net benefit to the whole village, to the tax base. I was asked to calculate, well, what is that going to do to an individual homeowner? Well, everybody's house costs a different amount. So the 500,000 was an estimate of the average value of your houses. And at an average value of 500,000, that homeowner would see a benefit of approximately 750,000, a net tax benefit of approximately 750,000.
$750.
That would be great, yeah, sure.
We could do that, that'd be wonderful. That's all right, don't worry. Let me also help on the whole tax analysis issue, because this gets to be sometimes very technical and very confusing. I want to make it very straightforward and very simple. I've been doing this for 30 years as a lawyer representing developers all around here. Every community I go into, the question is how many school kids you can generate. I ask that question because the school generation is what makes a project tax negative. This property, by definition, generates no tax, no school children, zero, because of the senior housing, and you've got businesses. So inherently, by definition, no possibility otherwise, it will be tax positive. Now, Could there be a flux in how much tax positiveness there is? Yes, there could be. If the properties end up selling for $325, or they end up selling for $275, and how that reflects in the assessor's office, yes, there'll be some flex at the end of the day, because nobody knows today exactly what the market will be when this thing comes along. But will it be tax positive? Absolutely. That
And
is
that
what
takes into account any infrastructure changes that has to occur in the town.
yes.
Like sewer,
Yes.
any of that stuff.
That has.
Calculated in.
That has been analyzed in the environmental impact statement as the impact on whether there's capacity. There will not have to be an expansion of the sewage treatment plant, for example. There's adequate capacity available. So the types of things that would be the big ticket items that will not result from this.
And the sewer is paid for basically by the usage fees. So the sewer is not paid for directly by the taxes.
As long as they don't have the capital project.
Right, as long as it's not, when I was not building a new plant, we're expanding this one. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any in the financial analysis, tax analysis, is there any consideration for the number of people who live within the community who want to sell their homes and move into senior housing, and in selling their homes, they're getting a big loss of potential, families with children, that's raising the number of children.
Let me answer that for you. There's
Repeat it
a
first, we couldn't hear it back there.
Oh, sure. The question was whether or not in doing the financial analysis, we projected a certain number of, or whether we considered even the possibility that there would be people within Cold Spring, or from within Cold Spring, who were seniors occupying, like I guess as empty nesters, occupying a home, and that they would sell their home, would move into this facility, and then a family would move in. And that therefore, was that taken into account in terms of the fiscal analysis? Two things. One, seeker itself, the environmental review process, which is with a context in which the fiscal analysis is done, requires one to project about that which you can reasonably foresee and know. I don't know that there's any way of knowing or predicting whether and how many, whether there would be empty nesters that would or would not go. Even if there were, let's assume that there were. We don't know that the families that would be moving in would have children. We don't know when they would have children. We don't know how many children they would have. Whether they would be moving in with kids that are already in school or coming in school in 5 years. There's really no way to actually do an analysis like that that would be anything other than sheer speculation and guesswork. On top of that, let's say you decided to come up with some guesses. I don't think, and Ann can speak to this, I don't think that at the end of the day, even if you did run those numbers, how many are we going to speculate? 5 units, 10 units are going to be? I mean, how many units are we building? We're not building, 500 senior citizen housing, and we're not talking about a mass migration from empty nesters into this project. It just doesn't have numbers that equate on the level of significance to make a big deal. What it is, in my humble opinion, a red herring. It's a red herring to propose or postulate a remote scenario that has very little ability to project, where you can't really put numbers on it, but it makes it seem as if there's a deficiency in the analysis. I am not aware, at least in my experience, of ever seeing anybody else do that on the scale of the project we're talking about here. You want to build thousands of units, and you want to talk about its effect otherwise? Maybe, but not in something that is this size, this diameter.
Well,
Did you want to add anything?
No, well, the other thing is that if somebody that is at the point in their life to sell their house and look for senior housing, if you could move to senior housing someplace else, and there is a life cycle of housing, and eventually, in the normal course of things, you're going to sell your house, and potentially a family with younger children might move in there. But that's not that's just a normal cycle of
That's
population.
that's a critical important point, and I should have connected those dots. Let me tell you why. The only way that this even becomes an analysis that makes sense is if this project would induce that. In other words, does this project, again, if you say, let's go down that path, the question that has to be asked is, would this project induce somebody to move when they wouldn't move otherwise? Would they so want to come into this senior housing, but would not move into senior housing anywhere else in the region? Because that's the only way that you could postulate this project causing that impact. So Ann's point, which is exactly right, is that if somebody gets to a certain age and they're infirm, or they no longer want to maintain their house, they're gonna move. And they're gonna move regardless of whether or not this property is here, unless there's something about this property that somebody can identify that says, oh wow, it's so special, it's so this, it's so that it's gonna cause those people to, oh well, I wasn't really thinking about moving, but now that Butterfield is here, I'm moving, okay? That's the kind of analysis that would have to be, and I just don't think that that's the kind of thing that anybody could project with any reasonable certainty. And I'm gonna wanna hit everybody with questions before I come back to somebody who has already asked one. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I've been at many meetings about this, not as many as I should be, but one of the constant things that keeps coming up is condo. And that a tax on a condo is different than a tax on a regular home. And that right now in the village, the properties that are considered condos are at 17%. And if this project goes through, that would be raised up to about 23%, I believe the number was given. Now, are these condos or aren't they condos?
They're condos.
So there will be a tax difference then, because supposedly taxes are based differently on condos than they are on regular homes and...
The answer is yes. There is a different method of assessing tax, which by the way has nothing to do with anything with us. In other words, it's how taxes are assessed. It's done across the board for all condos and so on. So the answer is yes, there's a different method of calculating taxes if you're a single family home versus if you're a condo. Now, where we go from that, I'm not quite sure, because the project will be tax positive with condos.
I think that's just one of the things that keeps coming up, and it's something that keeps coming through. So I needed to hear it from you guys.
Now you have heard it.
Please go on. The level of cost for a single family house typically has 3, 4, and 5 people living in it, whereas these condos are going to have 1 or 2 people living in them. It's limited, it's a 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms, and the 2 bedrooms are limited to a maximum of of 2 persons. So it's the population won't be exorbitant, and it's all privately, private garbage, private road maintenance. So the level of services that the village needs to provide for a condo is reduced compared to the level of services for a single-family home, and the scale is smaller. The cost, it also provides a moderate house. Condos provide not an affordable housing that has to be income qualified, but a more moderate price point of housing. So it is different than a typical single-family house, but it meets a different need than a single-family house.
Yes, there's two things with the condo thing. First of all, condos are more affordable than single-family homes because number one, they generally sell for less to start with, but number two, the taxes are lower. Condos, the state of New York requires condos to be assessed on an income approach, like a rental apartment. So the taxes are usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of what a comparable for sale home would be. So if you live in a single-family home and you're paying taxes on that single-family home and you sell that and move into a condo, first of all, you're going to be paying less for that, making it more affordable. Secondly, your annual tax bill is going to be substantially less. The second thing that's shown on the chart behind Steve is that the services provided by the village to a single-family home, if you have a single-family home that's on a street, they're going to provide snow plowing, street cleaning, sidewalk repair, street repaving, garbage collection, pruning of trees on your street, landscape maintenance, lighting, repair of your sewer laterals, etc. If you're in a condo in an internal project such as this, the village doesn't have to provide those services. The village, of course, is still going to provide services to the streets outside there, but there is a difference in the level of service that is the cost that would be incurred for a condo project versus a single-family home project.
And of course, your condo owners have to pay HOA, 126.
Hi, my name is Margaret Schatzel, and I have loved ones and friends that are seniors here in the village. I just have a few questions. You might have answered this in your other meetings, so I apologize. Can you tell us the specifics of what the room and the space will look like for the seniors, like the dimensions of it?
You know, we really haven't gotten to that point yet, but I would say that the one bedroom is going to be somewhere between 900 and 1,000.
I'm talking about the senior community,
The whole community.
the room, the actual center. Community room?
The one for the residents or the ones for, which one are you talking
The
about?
town.
You know, the town, I mean, all I've heard so far is they were looking for about 3,000 square feet, and that design has not been done yet.
Okay, so you won't know if there's a kitchen or the
That would be up to
the county hasn't discussed how the food will be heated or anything like
No.
that? Okay, so that's still not, those questions are not answered or?
No. No, actually, the county's at a point now where they're waiting for us to get our zoning approval before they take a next step.
All right, so,
Yeah, matter of fact, let me build on that, Paul, to just say one thing. So I think Tim alluded to this, you know, that there are cases signed, so this question has come up periodically, it's sort of like a catch-22. Paul can't sign a lease or make a commitment if he doesn't have approval for a project. And otherwise, I would be happy to take the case for the other side that he's breaching his contract if he doesn't provide it. Okay, so you can't sign a contract saying, I'll provide you with space. Doesn't matter if it's a private business, it's the county, it's the post office, or whoever it is for. So the only way those things get to move forward is if there's an actual approved project so that Paul can then make a commitment and say, yes, you want it, I'm here, let's go. So that's, if there's frustration, and we get into this circle of somebody saying, well, what guarantee do we have that you're actually going to do this? Well, the answer is there can't be a guarantee until there's something approved. How do you guarantee that there's going to be something when it's not allowed now? Okay, so that's the common sense answer to that. Yes, sir.
Where would the new post office be located in this redevelopment scheme?
It would either be in the basement of buildings 1 or 2, both along 9D.
You want to show them, Paul?
Okay, so that would be either this building or this building. And I think the code was further revised to limit us to the basement areas for retail use. First floor, which would be 9D level.
So ground. Yes, ma'am.
The difference between a co-op and a condo is basically that you're on the property of the condo. And what you can do is basically lease property. Are there any restrictions on condos that you're going to have the same purchase money for keeping the residents, or are there not limits?
Okay, let me first repeat your question. The question was to distinguish between the ownership interest between a co-op and a condo, and whether or not there would be any restriction on the ability of the condo owner to lease that to someone else. So first, if you'll allow me, condo and co-op 101, very short version. Okay? What you've described is not the difference between the two. Actually, what a co-op is you have shares of stock in a co-op corporation, and that corporation issues what's called a proprietary lease to you that entitles you to occupy your space, and that's what gives you your ownership interest, is the shares of stock. In a condo, you actually own the three-dimensional space that you occupy, plus, here's the technical legal term, an undivided fractional interest of all of the common elements. You have 2% of the rest of the property that's owned in common by the common. As far as restrictions are concerned on leasing, the two are no different. The co-op and the condo regime, by the bylaws of the bylaws of the co-op, or the declaration that establishes the condo, both can have restrictions on leasing or allow it fully. It doesn't matter by state law. Now, this, however, will be different in this regard. Whether co-op, whether condo or not, it's going to have all of the senior housing requirements that are in there. So those have to be complied with no matter what the form of organization is, co-op or condo, and anybody tenant, owner is gonna have to comply with that. Beyond that, you have to have a certain amount of owner occupancy for a certain period of time. That would be something that would be set up in the condo regime if it's to occur, and that has, those papers have not been drafted yet. I'm not aware of any discussion of that issue. There will be a condo board, yes, there'll be a homeowners association that will have the responsibility, if those of you are familiar, of all of the typical kinds of things that an HOA would do. Maintain the common elements, plow, snow plow, take care of garbage, whatever the other things are. All of these things that say Butterfield senior condos no, meaning they're not public services, those will have to be provided by their HOA and paid for by everybody's monthly dues. It's part of the reason why the taxes differential is there, is because it's recognized that condo unit owners also pay condo charges, and they pay for these services privately as opposed to public.
One of the things, though, that the planning board specifically recommended is that the deed restrictions on the units are for owner occupant, so that you can't simply buy it because you're over 55 and then lease it to somebody else. But one of the full-time occupants has to be over 55. So if that answers your question, that assists to answer your question.
That's your senior housing applies owner or tenant. Yes.
Are there any plans to set aside units for local seniors, reserved for purchase by local seniors?
Low price.
I do not believe
As I
that's
discussed, yes.
Yeah, my name's John Cronin. I live on Paulding Avenue, right across the street from the Butterfield site. So I have a question. I believe I know the answer to it. A conversation with a neighbor brought it up, and it wasn't good for everybody to hear. If Mr. Guillero decided to abandon this project and put the site up for sale, is there any restriction that the village board could impose to prevent the sale to a medical laboratory or another facility or any other kind of user?
The answer to the question is no. If you're literally asking, does a village board have the power to stop private property owners from selling property? The answer is absolutely, totally, 100% no. We still live in the United States of America. Now, as far as what that church purchaser could do with the property, well, that purchaser is no different than Paul. That purchaser could do what Paul could do today, which is to do whatever is allowed as of right. So the process, and I think everybody, I hope everybody understands this process is Paul coming to the village to say, I hear you about, you want things on this property that I couldn't do now under the applicable zoning. So I'll work with you to do that. And I don't know, should I say this? I mean, there is a part of me that sometimes feels no good deed goes unpunished. So, it's been a long review process for Paul to be able to allow the uses to occur that he wouldn't have to do if he developed the property right now. And I think we showed the as-of-right plans, or as-of-right development. It's massive.
But just to be clear on my actual question. So if a large medical laboratory came along and made an offer on this property, there's nothing the village board could do to prevent that transaction?
No. Anybody. No matter who they are.
Or any kind of school, or, any type of medical institution.
You making an offer?
What's that? Yeah, but we're going to discuss that anyway.
It's a side business, right? He's not
no,
keeping
no.
Right. Riverkeeper goes into medical. Other questions? Yes.
My name's Kathy Carmigel. I live in the village. I know that that this is showing no trees, but I heard the beech tree is being preserved.
Yes.
But there are a lot of other old trees that go down the road. Is there thought about preserving them as well, since they are on the 1 acre? And I have a second question too. Because this is a senior property and because there is underground parking, are elevators envisioned?
first question. The trees that are along 9D, some of them are not in good condition, but all of the ones that are in good condition will be retained, correct, right, is that correct, Paul? Right?
Yes, correct.
And the beech tree will be retained and preserved and guarded during construction. There is only, those are the significant trees on the site, so yes.
And
And in addition, there'll be additional landscaping, not at the scale of the beech tree, but, to dress the site up and to grow into mature trees.
There'll be elevators in every building. I'm sure there'll be an elevator.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hi, I'm Phil Heffernan on Church Street here. And I just had a question about, and it probably was addressed in the secret with you about traffic impact. This is a highly dense area as it stands today on the weekends. And I'm just wondering, with 55 residences, that probably somewhere around 100 new automobiles there, and, more pedestrians. Has there been any planning about that impact on the community when we reach peak usage on the weekends? Any plans that might have been incorporated that I don't see on this about, improving pedestrian use of that retail area across the street, this sort of thing?
There's a full traffic study that's it's in the environmental assessment form that's posted online, and you can take a look at that. The conclusions of the traffic study, and it was agreed to by the consultant to the planning board, and the planning board is that the project will not produce enough traffic to change levels of service, intersections up and down Route 9D. So the kind of, where do you have delays, on Saturdays going in and out of Food Town and that area from left turning vehicles, and at the light at Main Street at 9D, you won't experience any significant change. Senior housing tends to be pretty low trip generation. Obviously on weekends, people have choices as to when they travel. They're not obligated to travel during commutation trips going back and forth to work. So there won't be a major noticeable change in traffic patterns or delays, things of that nature. On the issue of pedestrian activities, the interior of the property has been designed to be pedestrian friendly. There are sidewalks on 9D all the way up to the light. So
there isn't really currently, though, any acknowledged pedestrian crossover 9D.
It's something that can be certainly taken up during site plan review, and it's going to be at the purview of the New York State DOT. We can't make changes to 9D, including a crosswalk, without a permit from the DOT. And if the village is interested in something like that, that can certainly be something that's pursued during site plan review.
Good. Oh, and one other quick question. This is a CGI rendering, which means you can kind of move it around. Are there any other views that might be able to be accessed on your website? That is, do we see it from any other point of view that would just be informative in terms of how it's going to be coming, let's say, coming from the opposite direction?
Not at this time until we actually finalize the location of both buildings and a few other the types of buildings. But we could get some more views just like this one, and that shouldn't be a big problem.
Yeah, that would be very, very helpful to see what we're doing.
Other questions, please? Yes, sir.
Al Zielinski. I have a question concerning this nice little chart that you have over here. Obviously, the Butterfield condos is the plan that you have here, but is it the same? Are we comparing that under single-family home ownership, or is it a different plan? For this comparison that you have on the table.
Yeah, I thought so too. It's just, I think it's a comparison simply between, on a generic basis, what typical single-family home services are provided by the government versus when you have a condo, what are provided not by the government, but by the HOAs.
Okay, but typically for a single-family home, it's still just along the street.
Yes, it's still along the street.
So then essentially what you're saying is the difference between what the condo provides and circulation, and that would then become village streets.
No, be private streets.
Well, under the condo plan, but under the single family.
No, there is no single family plan.
Well, there's three single families on Paulding.
I know, but I'm just trying to understand what that's
Right,
saying.
I think I know what you're asking.
And, you know, we're not really comparing apples to oranges because basically everything outside the property is still going to be maintained by the village. And if it's a single family ownership, unless the driveways and the roads that you show inside are converted over to the village, then the village still would not have any maintenance.
There will be no single families of the senior housing. It's not going to be changed from what we're describing to a series of single family homes. That's not proposed, it's not contemplated.
But if this were a subdivision with an internal public road providing access to single-family homes, that's, the chart would be applicable. There'd be garbage pickup, the internal roads would have maintenance, the street lights would have maintenance from the village, landscaping would have maintenance from the village, and the sidewalks would have maintenance from the village.
Other questions? Needs, hopes, wants, desires?
Yeah, I guess my question at the beginning was, Westbury Court, worked in Phillipstown. I think they made 12 units, something like that, 10 or 12 units. And by affordable housing, it meant residents of Phillipstown. I forget, it was income-based, but I think it was under like $80,000, $90,000, something like that. And they really reduced the price of these 12 units. Would the developer be open to anything like that to make this more attractive to people?
Well, I did offer to do affordable housing in the beginning, okay, and the planning board didn't want that, and I think the village board wanted me to do strictly market rate. So.
Well, there's a certain amount of units, but I'm saying they did market rate in Westbury, but they offered 12 units. I think there's a lot of units.
That was based on a lot of.
But they offered 12 units at affordable housing because people had to live in Phillipstown and so on and so forth. I think there's some fire department people live and so on. And like to give you an idea, I think it was 400. I think the house went for 250 or something like that. Now, would you be willing to offer, let's say, 6 units like that? That's something like that.
It would have to be discussed. It's never been discussed.
It's never been discussed. How would we get that discussed?
I think the village board.
So it had to be something, not the planning board?
No, I think you're at the.
So it had to be something to go to the village board.
Definitely.
Thank you.
The integral parking, it's only, to get the building 4, 5, and 6, it's only in from 6. Where is the entrance to the integral parking? Is that going from building 6 on far in? And would that be restricted to unit only, or would it be open?
It's only to unit owners.
But they have some type of gate or
Yeah, it'll be a garage door, just be automatically controlled, but there's an entrance here. It doesn't mean that in the future, after we get the site plan, that we might not bring an entrance in from here. So, but for now, we're showing it coming in from this direction.
maybe some units, if you're doing it 6, would have.
Well, anything that's in 4, 5, and 6 will be in this building, parking. And anything that's in 3 will be in 3.
Some of the very specific details are not fully engineered yet because you don't start to move down to tweak the nuts and the bolts if you don't know that you have a project approval yet. There's only so far that Paul is going to go into detail engineering and figuring out which space goes to which apartment, and will the entrance be over here, over there. Some of that deals with site conditions and other things, so they will be tweaked. But it will be for those unit owners only. Be some way to get in, the garage door opener. There'll probably be assigned spaces for individuals. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what's the big change from the current zoning to the proposed zoning that the village needs to look at?
Well, there's a couple of things. Probably the most notable is the mixed-use aspect of it. The second, I think equally notable, is the idea that this is, and I don't know if there's any other zone in this village that has this, is that the zoning is tethered to a concept. Normally you have text. The architect says you can do this, you can do that, and the property owner says, okay, I'll build as of right, but I still have to go usually to the site plan review of the planning board. The planning board sees that physical layout for the first time. Here, the village board has said, no, we want to basically control how this site is being developed. And then the planning board can fill in the details, but the village board is laying out the basic concept of how this is to happen. That's radically different, I think, than every other place in the village.
Could Mr. Guillero have proceeded with this project by seeking zoning variance for use?
Probably not, because in order to get a use variance, one has to show that one would not be able to get a reasonable return on the property. It's not like a variance where you want to get 2 inches or 2 feet of the side yard setback change. A use variance is something that you can only get if you cannot get a reasonable return on the property. And so if Paul came to me and said, Stephen, do you think I can go in and do this by use variance? I would say for that reason, probably not. And then secondly, this is a less known principle of the law, but you should appreciate this. The variance is not allowed to be an amendment of the zoning law in disguise. In other words, there's a certain level, scale of massiveness of a variance that you cross the line to it being a permissible object of a variance, and then it comes over to, no, you've got to amend the zoning if you want to do this. Now, a wholesale change to mixed use and so forth, my counsel would be that crosses the line, and we've got to go get it.
I wonder, when will this project actually take
We're wondering that same thing.
I'm gonna answer your question because most of us here, I think, are old enough to know this. Now, I'm gonna hold up the card to my head and I'll become Carmen. The simple answer is hopefully sooner rather than. Yes, sir.
Once you have all the approvals, how long you estimate the project start to finish?
For construction?
It's going to be a 2 to 3 year project.
Yeah, John Cronin again. In addition to being a neighbor of the project, I'm also a local senior. And I have a question about the county's commitment and the Butterfield development's response. If the county is willing to commit to participating in the development of a senior center and funding for a senior center, am I right in presuming that the project is committed to working in collaboration with the county to make that happen? And that's an outstanding commitment. Your commitment is not dependent upon other things.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Well, sewer and water were part of the environmental review that the planning board undertook, and they made a determination as with respect to all of the potential environmental impacts that this project cannot have the potential to generate any significant adverse environmental impacts. That would include on the water and sewer.
Okay, so here's my question. That site has not been used in certainly not at this scale. Although a reasonable assessment, everybody knows that realities can sometimes not turn out the way the prediction does. And I'm curious what kind of contingency may or may not be in place by the developer to ameliorate the impacts on residents in town if this does have some adverse effect on our very antiquated sewer and water system.
Well, let's break your question down. If you're referring to what conditions there may be on site, I'm not sure if that, when you said property hasn't been used for 20 years, that to me seems to mean that the focus of your question is the condition of the infrastructure on the site itself. Is that what you're saying?
No, because the site's being completely rebuilt.
Okay, well, that's why I was trying to understand.
No, but it'll provide a draw and a draw from the system and a excess blocking put into the system that's not been there for a while. So I'm just curious.
I can only tell you what the village's engineer said, that the systems were capable of handling the sewage and would be able to supply water. And that there were no problems that were anticipated to providing service for this project. If something happens in the future, we deal with it when it comes up in the future, depending upon what it is. I mean, so it's hard to answer a question that is not based on any known circumstance. So if something comes up in the future, depending on what it is, we'll all have to deal with whatever it is. But there's no. That's not a fair statement. Well, that's what I'm trying to answer. I said it depends on what it is. If it's on our site, let's say there's a big line on our site that we thought was okay, and it turns out to not be okay, we're gonna have to deal with it. If it turns out that there's a problem with some main sewer line someplace else in the village, then that's a problem that is village-wide. It's not gonna be our sewage that's gonna take care of that, just because we're putting in some extra sewage into a system that already exists. I don't have to require a plant expansion or anything like that. And if the village as a whole has old infrastructure, well, then it has old infrastructure, just as much as it's old infrastructure for your sewage and your neighbor's sewage and everybody else's sewage. So that's not us, that's the village as a whole. Sure.
Are you guys going to be putting a sidewalk along all of one of those houses, or is that just the main addition?
That's part of site plan, but if the village wants a sidewalk, we'll put sidewalk there.
Yes.
Linda Daniela, I'm a little confused about the fact that those condos will be privately owned. And when they're probably all sold, they will elect their own homeowners association and take care of those services. Meantime, the other buildings will be owned by Mr. Guillero, who will lease them. Is that the way it works?
That's correct.
Okay, so the parking lots for the, like the municipal offices are cleared by whom?
Municipal offices would be cleared by a company that I would retain to do the snow.
So you,
clearing
as
site.
landowner of this part, so actually we're breaking it up into privately owned and by the condo, or by the homeowners, and the rest is your responsibility.
Correct.
So when we talk about leasing for a senior center, what would happen if the senior center is leased, Mr. Guillero decides to sell what is his private property here to someone else who doesn't want to maintain that lease? I mean, I'm trying to get some sense of security for putting public offices into privately owned and therefore leased space.
Any leased premises, okay, the person leasing has rights, and in there says, the landlord will do certain things, and it'll be spelled out in the lease.
So the important thing would be to have an extended lease, so there couldn't be arbitrary changes when the lease is up.
Well, if there was arbitrary, there is also going to be an overall master association, because there's going to be three buildings, the Lake Pavilion, and Building 1 and Building 2.
Right.
So it'll all be controlled by that, but
Now what's this master association consist of?
basically those three buildings. Whatever I have that's left is not residential, okay, that would be a master association for those three buildings.
And would people in these buildings have some say about that? I mean, the Leahy building is not owned by you.
In order for me to rent to you, there's going to be a lease. And that lease is going to spell out all my obligations and all your, what you're supposed to be doing. So it's not like there's going to be a surprise. The lease is going to spell out exactly what I'm responsible for and what you're responsible for. Just like
Who owns the Leahy building now?
I own it, but it's a ground lease with Hudson Valley Hospital.
Oh, okay.
I'm back to Thomas's issue of infrastructure. Presumably in the residential units, it depends on how many people live there. As to what kind of stress or non-stress will be on the infrastructure, sewer, water, that kind of thing. It does.
Well, hold on one second. Hold on. I'm going to tell you what the way it's done, and I think it'll satisfy. There's a reasonable worst case scenario that's possible. It's not that we turn around and do an analysis and say, you know what, we really think that a third of a human being is actually going to live in here. No, there's a reasonable worst case scenario that's positive about the number of people that are occupying these units. Not some, and I'm gonna hear you out. Not something that we do unilaterally, but that the planning board's consultants sign off on the environmental assessment. So once it's agreed upon as to what the reasonable worst-case scenario is in terms of occupancy of these units, then there are standard numbers that are accepted by people who design these systems as to the number of gallons of sewage, the number of gallons of water that are water required, sewage generated for a particular project, and then you turn around and you have your numbers. That's the analysis.
But it still depends on the number of people living there, is that correct?
Of course.
The study, the EAF, refers to a study from Rutgers about the number of people that will be living there. It's artificially low, and I took it upon myself to look for this study. It doesn't exist. It's made up of whole fabric. You know, I'm telling you this. I'm saying this to my friends and neighbors. This study doesn't exist. And so some of this information,
Does the study exist?
it does not, it does not exist.
Hold on a second. If you say it doesn't exist, let's hear where it is.
Yeah, where is it?
It's the Rutgers University
Right.
Center for Urban Policy Research.
Right.
If you give me your email address, I will send you a copy of the study.
I'll
send you a copy of the published.
They don't have it. I've been through it, and I've called them.
So hold on a second. With all due respect, okay? If you say it doesn't exist, we'll not only send it to you, but we'll post it on the website.
That'd be
More
fine.
than
On whose
half.
website?
I will
The
post
Butterfield
it,
website.
all of the information for this
It's
project.
I'll give you the
is
address
posted-
right now.
It's
You put it on a card, don't worry, we'll take your card, put it on your
I don't have
card,
a
we'll
card
give
with
it to
me.
you, and we'll post it.
Secondarily, the water and sewer figures were not based on those population multipliers. They were based on New York State DEC standard factors for what housing units use. So you can agree or disagree with Rutgers University study, which I did
There
not.
is no Rutgers University study. There isn't one.
It's gonna be posted. You don't think it's posted, then go to the village board when the hearing comes.
I will be
you're
glad,
saying-
if she puts it on the website, I will find it.
I'm just gonna send it to you.
No, I want to look it up. I
Sorry,
want to see
I
it.
don't wanna harp on it, but
You can harp.
I think you're still saying that, if this additional flow comes, the sewer plant can handle it. But if something happens in between, that's up to them. I think
Yes.
that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. This is no different than any other project. You turn around and you build a house on a vacant lot, and you do everything that you're supposed to do on your lot to hook up to the existing main that's in the street. And you design it right, size it right, capacity is there, you do it right, and then you flush the toilet. And then the next day, oh my gosh, there's a break in that line. You didn't cause that break. That break was caused not because you flushed your toilet, but because the main had ended its useful life or whatever the problem was. So yes, there is always going to be, Paul is not standing as an insurer to the village to say that every single village sewer line between his property and the sewage treatment plant, he is now going to warrant for the village of Cold Spring is going to be perfect from now until eternity. No developer does that. No developer does.
But once he walks away from it, if it's clear that there's something, a flow problem in the city
If it's-
because of the extra flow.
If it's caused by, if it is something that has been, if it's something that would be associated with this project, that has already been analyzed. That's why I said, that's why I went through the process of saying, the environmental review has occurred. The conclusion that was reached by the planning board after receiving input from its consultants and from the village engineer, not just us, is that there are no potential significant impacts on the village's sewer system.
The other thing that we can remember is that this project, this property, along with all of the properties in the sewer district, are paying taxes to the sewer district that entitle them to sewer service, and they've been paying those taxes long before they're going to use this particular capacity. If there is a system-wide problem, and that's how a sewer district works, if there is a system-wide problem, that's what those fees are designed to.
Right, their user fees, and everybody who's in that district pays their fair share. And this property, by the way, I don't pay the post, but it certainly is gonna pay when costs like that have to, for new infrastructure or new capital expenditures, they get spread around, well, this property is gonna have to pay its fair share, just like everybody else, probably pay more than it. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Mike Armstrong. Question regarding how you think the cost the village would incur with this project, and how likely it would be that the village would actually experience those costs. If you could go into a little more detail on how those calculations are made, and then what the probability of that being that cost.
Everybody hear me? Here. The standard fiscal impact methodology suggested to take a look at the overall village costs and divide them by the overall population. And that's a generalization, but it gives a good approximation of, in this community, the level of services that are provided and what each person shares. And the costs that are paid for by the village are derived, the payment is from a number of sources. The primary one is the tax levy, which is the piece that you're all concerned with. So we look at the total village budget, the total revenue that the village collects from its taxes. We divide that by the total number of people and approximate a municipal cost per person. And in this instance, that cost is approximately $708 per person. And I took that and I multiplied it times the projected population of Butterfield, 83 people, and came up with a cost of approximately $58,000. The tax revenue to the village is projected to be $119,000. I'm sorry, I have it up in front of me. $119,000. So there'll be a net benefit of approximately $60,000 to the village after it pays the generalized costs for the new people to live there. Those generalized costs, in this case, are overstated because it's a private development, because it won't have a lot of services. I did take a second look at what costs this project is likely to generate. And when you look at, the insurance that it'll have to pay on Gateway Park and, an extra quarter of a police officer, the costs are actually going to be approximately, this is an estimate, and that's why I like the generalized one, because it certainly won't be more than that. But in this instance, it'll be approximately $16,000. Out of the $119,000 projected in tax revenue, $16,000 or so is the actual cost that the village will have to expend now that the new Butterfield project is here. So we've projected it on the low side because it's always easier to project low than high, but the net benefit to the village is very likely to be more than $100,000 a year, which is a significant tax benefit. Their budget is not enormous, so that's a significant proportion. Does that answer your question?
We didn't want to keep people after noon, so we're almost at that point. So if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Kathy Carville, the private residences that read on Paulding Avenue, what is their approximate size? I assume they're included in the 83.
They are included in the 83 population, that's correct. The approximate size that we built according to the zoning code, I'm sure.
I don't know if it was designed yet.
Yes. I would say around 2,500 to 2,800 square feet.
They haven't been fully designed, but there will not be any variances sought for. All right, yes.
Yeah. I realize it's all theoretical, but is there any process understanding what order things get built in, taking all those forward? Is there any conceptual?
I think, we submitted a phasing plan. I think the first building would be the one for municipal services, senior center, post office. That would be the first, and it'd be a commercial building. And I don't remember whether we started on the condos or the single family next, but as soon as we have enough leasing, we would start the second building, that would be on 90. And the condos would be built, probably, that'd be phase 2. One building, then another building, or if there's more than 2 buildings, we'll do them one at a time.
It's usually a market absorption kind of thing, and try to project how many users there. Yes, sir.
Paul, isn't it true, Tom Kelly, 18 West Street, isn't it true that at some point this process is no longer cost effective and you can sell the property to developers who will have zero interest in the community?
We did field that
As of
question
right?
earlier, yes. The answer is, whether cost effective or otherwise, Paul could sell this at any time.
So it's in the community benefit to work with the
Well,
developer?
I said at the beginning that no matter what the form, whether pro or con, I was not going to allow comments in favor or opposing the project. I appreciate your sentiment, tell it to the village board. Okay, any other thoughts, or questions, I should say? If not, and seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For coming. Really appreciate it.
Stand in front of somebody.
No, I thought you were outside after.
I think